Hello again, Year 9, and welcome to the second lesson or session of this January lockdown. Hopefully things are going okay so far. And remember, get in touch if you are not sure. So today's lesson, we're going to have a little look at the rise of the dictators, particularly looking at Stalin in Russia and Hitler, just to give us a little bit of a taste of what's to come in the next few weeks. So unlike last session, this one's a little bit more content heavy. You need to really think about what you're writing today and what we're going to talk about. You need to take a little bit more time really to read through some information. All of the guidance is in the Google Classroom, of course. All right. You'll need to have open as well your grid to type as you get onto the comparison task. But we'll see as we go on. It's all in Google Classroom. There's also some video clips to accompany this one too, to hopefully to break it up a little bit for you. But yeah, so just pause this video and then click on the link in Google Classroom when you're ready to watch those videos. Alright, let's get cracking then. So, why was there a growth of dictators after World War One? Okay, so we're going to find out a little bit more what a dictator is today, and then try and understand why after the war there was a growth of these dictators around Europe. Alright, so on the screen there you can see Stalin first, and then Mussolini from Italy, and then obviously Hitler from Germany. Okay, so what is democracy and what is dictatorship? Let's really quickly just have a little look at that. It is important to understand before we get started on this. A democracy is a type of political system. So in our country, we are a democracy. Essentially what that means is the people have a vote. They vote for their leader. If they don't like the leader, they can vote the leader out. That is essentially what this is. So in our country, obviously Boris Johnson is our current Prime Minister. So we can choose every 4 years or whenever they call an election to go and vote for somebody else. Okay, so that is democracy. The people have a say. It comes from ancient Greece. Okay, so a dictatorship then is obviously the opposite of that. Is the citizens don't really choose their leader. A dictator, someone who runs a dictatorship, is someone who is in charge, but really doesn't have to follow any laws or constitutions of the country. They basically do whatever they want. More often than not, a dictator is someone quite brutal in how they treat their citizens. Okay, so a good example of a dictator is Hitler. He was a dictator because he had absolute total power in Germany. Now, slightly different to a lot of dictators here, just a side note, is that Hitler was elected before he became a dictator, so he used democracy to get into power. And remember we said last time about the Treaty of Versailles being the sort of roots of this. As we go through the next few weeks, you'll hopefully see why that is the case. That people just were really angry and didn't really forget. So they voted for Hitler in anger and opposition at the Weimar government at the time. So although he is a dictator, he wasn't at first. He was actually elected, and that's one quirk really to Hitler compared to many other dictators throughout history. Okay, so let's move on a little bit then. Your first job today, please, is you're going to see on the next slide some features or definitions. What I'd like you to do is, after you've drawn this little grid in your book or in your Google document, whatever it is you're writing on, I'd like you to try and put into which side you think these features would go. Okay, it's not really too difficult. Just think logically, think a bit of a common sense really from what we've just talked about, and then we'll get cracking. All right, so the features are, as you can see on the screen. So pause the video now, and then write these into the categories that you think they should go into. All right, if you need to rewind, just go back a little bit. So pause and then get writing. As soon as you're ready, come back. All right, good. So let's have a little check and see if you were right or wrong. So key features of a democracy: laws made by the court and elected politicians. They have regular elections. People are not punished for speaking out. People can read what they like. Police and armed services are there to protect the people. All right, whereas in a dictatorship, usually it's just one party in power. Secret police frighten people. The leader is made out to be some kind of hero. The government uses spies and informers, and the government controls the media. All right, trade unions, which are basically they fight for the rights of the workers to have good working conditions and things. Trade unions are banned. They're the ones who normally cause strikes and things. So governments don't like trade unions because they can cause chaos, can't they? So hopefully you did quite well on that. Maybe there's a couple that you got a bit confused on, but generally speaking, I think you'll have done fine. If not, let me know. and I'll try and explain to you a bit more. So, oh yeah, one more. So laws change when the leader decides. That's quite obvious in a dictatorship, isn't it? He decides what law to pass. No one can really say anything about it, because if they do, they might end up in a camp, so like in Germany, or a gulag like in Russia. So people generally just stay quiet because they don't want to get killed or put into prison. So that was a little exercise just to give us a brief idea of what democracy and dictatorships are. So, after World War One, obviously, it's chaos. We looked at that last lesson and we looked at it in school before Christmas. The political unrest is high. There's riots and rebellions everywhere. Economic conditions are dreadful. People are starving. The economy's poor. This gives dictators a real good opportunity to say, well, the government, or democracy, if you like, has failed, so now we'll take power and make everything better again. One key thing to think about, really, is when times are tough, normally economical, to do with jobs or the economy, normally we have extreme politicians who rise to power. Now, that could be extreme left-wing, which is more towards communism, or extreme right-wing, which is more towards Nazism. But normally, when times are good and everyone's relatively happy and everyone's got jobs, then we don't really have extreme leaders, and we certainly don't have dictators. But these opportunities do allow people, when they're angry, to pick or to change the system of government in their country. Okay, so let's have a little look at Germany first and see what we think. So this is obviously Adolf Hitler, very recognisable character. So in this yellow box, I'm just going to put a basic overview of how Hitler got into power and some of the things that he promised the German people. Remembering that he was elected, he actually got voted for. And then there is a video to watch as well. So I'll put the information on. What I'd like you to do really is just do a quick fact file of Hitler with some of the key facts from this information. Things like he promised them that he would overturn the Treaty of Versailles. Just pick a few little facts from this. You don't need to write every single word. Okay, so key information. 1933, January 30th to be precise, he was elected as Chancellor. Okay, he begins almost immediately taking back some of that land that they had taken away from them in the Treaty of Versailles. It was pretty easy, really, because the countries that he's invaded are weak politically and economically. So he just goes in there and takes it back, particularly in Eastern Europe and Poland. All right. He promises the people that he will overturn the Treaty of Versailles. Now, remember, people are still alive who remember the treaty, the horror, the shame, the anger. So for someone to basically come along and say that they're going to fix it all and stop paying those debts and not accept blame and guilt, that was probably quite appealing to a lot of people. He also talks about this superior Aryan race. You might have heard the term Aryan, so blonde hair and blue eyes. Hitler believes they are the superior people. So he's going to ensure that the world is full of Aryan, superior people. And he's going to get rid of people who he doesn't quite think fit that bill. So Jewish people, Slavs, the Eastern Europeans. Basically, he said he's going to get rid of those people. All right. He also plans to unite the German-speaking people of the world. So there's a little bit of information, very, very brief, just to give you a quick fact file of Hitler. So this video that I'd like you to watch from Andrew Marr will give you a little bit more detail. So as you watch it, if you just add some notes to your Hitler or Germany fact file, okay, the link is in your Google Classroom. So pause this video now and then go and open that one up. When you're ready to come back to this, just obviously you can press play, maybe open in a separate tab or something. Okay, so I'll see you after you've done this, and hopefully you'll have a little bit more of an idea about the rise of Hitler. Alright, welcome back. Hopefully that video was quite useful. I do like that video. Andrew Marr is a very good historian. You might recognise him off the telly, but he's pretty good, and that was a nice, sort of relatively brief overview of how Hitler came to power. So in Italy, alright, so similar times really, so in the basically after the war, but the early 20s, this guy Mussolini takes power. He is a dictator, he's a fascist as well, which basically is the same thing. He is in charge and he makes all of the decisions, and if you sort of upset him, you'll know about it. So again, in Italy, there's economic strikes, there's riots. It's a terrible place to be. It's the same as every other country, really, so that's quite useful for you to remember. This fascist party is a nationalistic party. Remember, the Nationalists was part of the problem for World War One. The Black Hand Gang and Gavrilo Princip, they were nationalists, weren't they? So they gained support in Italy because of the chaos. They say they're going to fix everything and bring order and structure, which Mussolini did. And it was quite appealing, all right? So he's going to restore the order from the hell and chaos. And think logically. If you're living in chaos with people in the streets rioting and shootings and all sorts going on, if someone offers to fix all that and make life a little bit more stable, you might give them a bit of a chance, mightn't you? So he wants Italy. In his mind, he's going to take Italy back to the good old days of the Roman Empire thousands of years ago. Maybe a little bit adventurous, but, you know, he took power anyway. So this is our second dictator, really, in Europe post-World War One. Okay, so then we meet this guy, Joseph Stalin. We're going to know Stalin pretty well, particularly those of you that pick GCSE. We're going to spend some time with Stalin in the Cold War. He takes over the Soviet Union. So this new revolutionary country. We've killed the monarchy, remember, and the Bolsheviks or the communists took over. Stalin takes power. So you do a little fact file for Stalin now as well. Okay, so Lenin, who took power in 1917 in the revolution, he dies after setting up this government. There's a bit of a power vacuum, really. Who's going to take over after Lenin? And in the end, Stalin does take over. He is a dictator, and he's pretty ruthless and quite brutal, actually, to his people. Most dictators are, but I would say close to at least 100 million Russians, or peasants rather, died under Stalin, which we'll have a little look at today. So, he's a communist, and he believes the same kind of things as Lenin. Okay, so just a little bit more there. So Germany thought the Soviet Union were weak, so they didn't even try to really have an alliance with them. Although there were efforts to make agreements, World War II saw the Soviet Union joining sides with the Allies, so with us again, versus Germany. So again, that gives Germany that problem, the same as World War One, where they've got to possibly fight now on two fronts, east and west. All right, so that's just a little bit of information about the Soviet Union and the three main dictators. This session is really all about Hitler and Stalin and comparing them and trying to see if they were similar or different. All right, so here we are. I have a little bit of a recap before we move on to, this is Karl Marx, remember? So what I'd like you to do is just like to pause this video and just make a couple of notes in your book or your Google Doc, whatever you're writing on, without looking back on who Karl Marx was and what did he say, what were his ideas or his beliefs. All right, and then come back, unpause, and then we'll see how many you got. Okay, so let's see. So Karl Marx developed the idea of communism. Hopefully you remember that. He blamed the capitalist factory owners for making large profits whilst the workers were treated really badly. So he basically encouraged the workers to fight up for their rights. He believed eventually the workers would stop accepting this and have a workers' revolution and seize power. Which is quite dangerous, isn't it, communism, when you look at it like this, that the workers would rise up, particularly if you are a business owner or running a government. Okay, so he also said the workers' government will share out the wealth of society fairly. So remember, if you've said something along the lines of everyone's equal, everyone has a job, or everyone has somewhere to live, everyone's got food, or any of those kinds of things, that's a good little recap of what Karl Marx believed in and what communism said. Okay, good. Let's carry on then. So how similar were Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler? They have different political beliefs. Obviously, Stalin is a communist, so he is on the extreme left of the political spectrum, and Hitler is on the extreme right. They are both dictators, though, and neither of them believe in democracy, really. So during the first half of this 20th century, they come from relatively nobodies. Hitler was in the trenches in the war. Stalin was just a student who didn't like the way things were, so went to some riots and things. But essentially, both came from nothing and ended up running two massive dictatorships. So this next task is where you're going to have to take a little bit of time to, pause the video here and there, have a little read, and fill in your table as we go. So let's see. Open up, if you just pause this video now and then go and open up your table from Google Classroom. It'll probably open up as a doc or whatever. The boxes should be fairly clear. I would just type in them, really. Don't worry about them going out of size, because once it's complete, we can get it all into the right font size so it fits. And then we can get it printed and in your books when we get back. So you'll see on this table, when you're ready to go, there are some columns down the left and across the top. So we're going to try and find some information out about Stalin's early life and Hitler's early life. What did they both believe in? How did they rise to power? How did they keep control? How did they change people's lives? The workers, and how did they change people's lives, women and family? And what happened to young people? So they're the main things we're going to try and figure out over the next half an hour or so. maybe a little longer with the clips, but we'll do Stalin first because that then makes sense. In the rest of the table, you can see what's similar that Hitler did. You could put in the similarities column, and what's different that Hitler did. And then at the end of it, once we finish, we can see the last column on your table. You can see is a rating out of 10, or how similar were their early lives. So if they were the same exactly, then you might put 10. If they were nothing alike, then you might put 1, and so forth. Okay, so hopefully that's quite straightforward, but if not, just drop us a line and we'll try and explain it a little bit clearer. Okay, so let's go. On the next few pages, there's going to be loads of information. Just you pause where you need to and unpause when you need to fill in the table. You ready? Okay, let's go. So this first page, you can find some things out about both of their early lives. So have a read through both and just start filling in your table. And when you're ready, we can move on. So this information that you can see now is going to help you for the early lives column. So do Stalin first and then compare whether Hitler was similar or different. Okay? Right, hopefully you've managed to get that column filled in. So if we move on a little bit, I'll talk you through some of these things. You can pause, remember, or you can wait till I've gone through all of this page and then add them to the columns that you think they need to be in. So firstly, Stalin believes in communism and supported the Russian Revolution to remove Tsar Nicholas II. Okay, following Lenin's death, Stalin went against Trotsky, so he was one of the other people going for leadership of the Soviet Union. Stalin wanted to establish communism in just the USSR, not abroad, whereas Trotsky wanted to spread it across the whole world. So this gives us a bit of an idea now of how devious Stalin can be. All right, he very purposefully tricked Trotsky, and he told him the wrong date for Lenin's funeral. So obviously only Stalin turned up, and all of the Russians thought this was disgusting. How can this Trotsky guy want to run the country and he couldn't even be bothered to turn up to the great Lenin's funeral? So you might think that's quite clever. I think it's a little bit sly, a little bit devious, but actually it really worked because people turned against Trotsky and Stalin eventually took over. All right. So then Stalin, and this is a little hint to help some of you out, a similarity perhaps, he removes all key politicians, anyone who's a danger or a threat to him. And we can see here a picture of Trotsky, who is murdered with an ice pick in the back of the head. It's a bit brutal, isn't it? A little bit gross. This is, in fact, the actual ice pick that did it. All right. So that was one way to get rid of your enemy, isn't it? Is stick an ice pick in his head. And that's one of the things that Stalin did. And also, clearly, Hitler did that as well. So there's a similarity straight away. Okay, so if we keep going then. Stalin used terror to control the USSR, the Soviet Union. There could be no opposition and they would be too scared to oppose. So if you did anything out of line, you might be sent to a gulag, or a concentration camp is what they'd be called in Germany. But to find out if people were saying things against Stalin, they had a secret police, a spy network. They tapped phones, they listened to conversations. You didn't really know who you could trust. Children informed or snitched on their parents, perhaps around the dinner table. They were having a conversation and maybe mum or dad said something about Stalin that they didn't like. Well, the child would go and tell somebody, tell the secret police. There you were sent to the gulags and you were tortured to the gulags. Are in the north, Russia and Siberia, which is just really snowy and cold and freezing. Really horrific place to be. And then a purge. All enemies within the party are purged or removed. So 500,000 people were purged in these public show trials. So a show trial is really just it's a trial to see if you're going to be guilty or not, but everybody knows the outcome is already decided, so it's just really for show. And also, think about it, if you were to see these trials and then these executions happening, you probably wouldn't, act out or say anything because you'd be quite scared. Teachers and engineers and workers were also purged. 18 million by 1937 removed. All right, so that's one way to get rid of your teacher. It's just gone grass on them. So we'll see when we look at Hitler in a little bit if there's anything similar or different. But that's quite a brutal way to run your country, isn't it? But it's quite a good way, I think, if you want to make people just follow on what you believe. All right. He also uses propaganda and censorship. So propaganda is a really common word that we hear a lot now at the moment, particularly when we think about what's happening in America and things like that and fake news. So that's what basically propaganda means. It's promoting an idea that you want people to believe. It's normally a lie, all right? But sometimes you can make things just seem a little bit worse or a little bit better than they actually were. to make people think a certain way, and also censorship. So to censor something is to stop people seeing or reading or hearing what you don't want them to see, hear, or read. So all newspapers and radio stations are controlled by Stalin. All churches were closed and religion is banned. They have to worship Stalin instead. However, Stalin was quite popular, probably due to the propaganda that he is, a great hero and a great leader, but also probably people are more scared to not be. And this one good way of getting propaganda out there to make people think that someone's special is he built a statue in every town in Russia. All right, so that's some of the things that Stalin did. We'll pause it here so you can start filling in your table, unless you've been doing it as we go. And then there's another page for Stalin, and then we'll compare to Hitler. Okay, so to carry on then, his government ran all of the industries, 100 new industrial towns, and 15,000 new factories were built. So this would be into how were the lives affected. This would be for the workers, this information. All right. Unemployment was almost non-existent. So anyone who was struggling to find work before Stalin, well, really everybody had a job. So that's good, isn't it, I suppose? The problem is they were paid less, paid really poorly. They worked so many more hours. And the punishments are really harsh. If they were late, they would lose their homes, they'd be fined, or they'd be sent to the gulags. So although they've got jobs, this is not something that we could probably say is a particularly nice place to be. All right. So the peasants in the countryside, they were forced to join collective farms. It's called collectivization. Essentially what this was is the government would control all the farms and make all the peasants work for the government. And they were told they had to produce so many products, so eggs, vegetables, whatever, and if they didn't and they failed, they were sent to the gulags, or if they refused to join the collective farms, they were also sent to the gulags. So not only were people killed by sent to the gulags in this collectivization or this collective farming, but actually millions and millions and millions, almost maybe over 100 million Russian peasants starved to death because the production of food in the collective farms wasn't successful, and so little was being produced that actually people starved. Some people tried to grow their own things, and if they did and they were caught, then obviously they would be sent to a gulag as well. All right, so women now. Women should be more independent, Stalin said, not just wives, not just at home with the babies. Thousands of creches were set up so that women could work in the factories. Many children ended up on the streets, though, in gangs of orphans, and they only survived by stealing and begging. So a lot of these women basically just had to go to work, because if they didn't, they were obviously refusing the great dictator Stalin, and that meant that their children ended up on the streets or worse. So hopefully you're seeing a bit of a thing here that it was not a good place to be living in Stalin's Russia. It might also go some way to see why some people are a bit afraid of communism coming into our country. Alright, so young people again. So each young person, according to Stalin, should receive 9 years of free education. However, the resources were so bad and the teachers were so badly paid, it wasn't really a good education at all. RE was replaced with atheism. So atheism, remember, is where you don't really believe in any religion at all. And communism. The curriculum was mostly technical training. So basically preparing you for working in factories when you left school. And the Soviet history was rewritten completely to promote Stalin and Lenin as the great heroes. Trotsky was airbrushed out of history. He's like he never existed. And similarly, which you'll see, hopefully, just give you a little bit of help for what's coming with Hitler, education was also pretty much Nazified as well, just to make sure that the children learned the Nazi versions of history. So young people were expected to join the pioneers, and they promised to obey the Communist Party. They used to go camping and team building. They had a pretty good time, really. Maybe a little bit like Scouts, but a bit more intense, I guess. Okay, so that's Stalin done. You just take the time now, pause the video again if you need to add a little bit more to your table. You should have something in each of the columns for Stalin, and then we'll move on to Hitler when you're ready. Okay, so here we are with Hitler's column now. You have a choice this time. You either put something into similar to Stalin or different to Stalin as we go through these. All right. So firstly, Hitler didn't seize power like Stalin. He was elected. Remember, we've talked about that already. So that would be in a difference column straight away, wouldn't it? Germany was a democracy. This new Weimar Republic that replaced the king, remember, the Kaiser. they really didn't ever get over the hatred and anger towards the Treaty of Versailles. And Hitler took advantage of this by appealing to all those angry people. So he did get voted for, and in 1933 became the Chancellor. Although he was elected, he had already, though, attempted to take power in Germany by force way back in 1923. It's called the Munich Putsch. He was sent to jail, but it was a bit of a joke, really. He should have really been killed for treason, but he was sent to jail for 5 years, but he only served 9 months. And while he was in jail, he wrote his famous book Mein Kampf, that you might have heard of, which is basically his plans for how he was going to take power properly. He realised that he couldn't try to take power again. So while we're talking about the Munich Putsch, if you pause this video and you'll go to your Google Classroom, you'll see a link to the Munich Putsch clip. Have a little watch of that before you come back to this, just to give you a visual of really what happened during the Putsch. Putsch means rebellion, so the attempted takeover of Germany. Okay, when you're ready, come back to this and unpause this one. Alright, so as well as attempted taking over, when he was coming to power, there was a real fear of communism in Germany, partly because everyone could see what was happening in Russia. There'd already been many economic difficulties over the last 10 years or so. Hyperinflation in 1923, for example, one egg might cost you a couple of 100 billion marks. People couldn't buy food. They had money in wheelbarrows. They decorated their house with paper money because it was worthless. Billions and billions for bread and an egg and things like that. So it was a real mess. Poverty went up. Homelessness was high. And in 1929, the Wall Street crash happened in America. You might have heard of it, but basically what it meant was that there was a Great Depression around the world. 6 million people in Germany were unemployed, and Hitler promised them jobs. So, of course, they voted for him. That might be some of the reasons why Hitler got voted for in 1932 in the election and became Chancellor in January 1933. Similarly, just to give you a little bit of help, a similarity is that Hitler also used propaganda and censorship to control the ideas. He also controlled newspapers and radio stations. Hitler was portrayed as a hero to save Germany. He was going to make Germany great again, and he promised those desperate and depressed people work and bread using this propaganda. So those 6 million people really felt Hitler was going to offer them something. Okay. This is one of the most famous posters that you will have seen in Germany in 1932 in the general election. It basically says in German, "Our last hope," and Hitler. Now, and you can see in this picture here, old people, young people, babies, women, working classes. Essentially, this picture here is showing us 6 million depressed and desperate people, and Hitler is the last hope. So it's a good example of propaganda to try and convince people to vote for him, and it worked. It really did. It was very successful. All right, so that is Our Last Hope, one of the most famous posters from the Nazis. So if you just pause this video again, make sure you've got this information into one of your columns in your table, and then when you're ready, move on to the next page. All right, so Hitler believed that the Aryan race were the master race, and he would rid the world of non-Aryans within 1,000 years. He called this the 1,000-year Reich. Okay, he's going to kill everybody, or remove everyone, or breed out anybody who wasn't Aryan. Okay, so you'd stop. Perhaps, for example, if you were not an Aryan, it was illegal to have a relationship with a Jew, for example, or marry a Jew, or even have sex with a Jew. You would be sent to a camp for that, in the hope that they could breed out these not perfect humans. Also, if you had some mental health or physical disability, women especially, or you had children who had learning difficulties, then you will have been sterilised so that you couldn't have more children. Essentially what they're saying is you couldn't pass on the genes that make weak humans. It's all a little bit extreme, a little bit intense, but that was what they did to try and create a perfect master race. Jews were blamed for everything that happened in the world, particularly all the problems in Germany. The Jews were blamed for World War I coming to an end, and Hitler promised to rid the world of Jews. There's an awful lot of anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish thoughts in Germany at the time, and Hitler basically just said what other people were thinking and feeling, and got a lot of support that way too. Okay, so we talked about terror with Stalin, ice picking in people's heads and stuff. So terror was also used by the Nazis to keep power. So the SS, you might have seen the SS in some films, or you might have heard of them. They are the black shirts. They wear a black uniform. They are basically Hitler's bodyguards, but they were a ruthless killing machine. They ran the concentration camps that you definitely will have heard of. The Gestapo were the spies, the secret police. So they were listening in. Nobody knew who the Gestapo were or where they were. You know, you could just say something in a supermarket and someone might overhear you, or again, your children might report you to the Gestapo if you've said something against Hitler. So there's an awful lot of similarities there, isn't there? The law courts were controlled by the Nazis, so it was impossible to have a fair trial. If they decided they were going to kill you, then they were going to kill you. Okay. They also have concentration camps, so like the gulags in Russia, the concentration camps in Germany and in Eastern Europe. They were set there for homosexuals, Jewish people, disabled, people who told jokes about the Nazis. Essentially, any enemy of the state was sent to a camp. All right. They also used propaganda when he was in power, not just to get power, but to convince everyone that he was a glorious leader. And they held massive rallies with 100,000 people at these things listening to Hitler speaking. It would have been quite amazing, really, to be there and witness this love of this guy in these rallies. You might have seen some similar things on the telly in the elections, particularly in America. They have rallies where lots of people come and listen to the presidential candidates. He also took control of the newspapers and the radio. Every single person in Germany was expected to have one radio, a cheap radio, but only had one station that was a Nazi station and had a low frequency so they couldn't listen into other countries. That was one way of controlling them, as well as taking control of films, art, buildings and posters. They basically convinced everyone that Hitler was a hero and he was the saviour of all Germans. Propaganda also convinced people, though, that Jews were evil, as were communists. So people started to believe it. So any books that were written by Jews or written by any scientist or anything like that goes against what Hitler thought, they were burnt. Massive book burning events took place. Very often, Hitler Youth meetings, they just spend the night burning these old books. Jazz was banned. Jazz is music from America and obviously has a origin with African Americans. So Hitler seen that as disgusting, really, and didn't want any part of that in Germany. Okay, so Hitler's enemies from within the Nazi Party and other political enemies were also dealt with in a purge. We've seen that word before, the purges in Russia. So on the night of the Long Knives, Hitler purged his enemies. Okay, so the same things that Stalin did, he did without obviously sticking ice picks in people's heads, but just as brutal. Hitler went on and killed, or the SS rather, went around this night and killed all of Hitler's enemies. Again, you can pause this here, finish your table before you watch the Night of the Long Knives clip in your Google Classroom, and then come back to make sure you've got everything you need. And then we'll finish this little bit off by looking at the Hitler Youth and women. All right. So when you're ready and you've watched the Night of the Long Knives clips, it's only a quick one, but it gives you a bit of an idea about how Hitler finally got rid of anyone who was a bit of a threat. Okay, let's move on then. So finally, the Hitler Youth was an organisation for all children at different ages. So similarly to the Pioneers, I guess you could say, they had a group for children. It was all really about brainwashing them and preparing them for war and making them think that Jews and communists were evil and things like that. So they did fun things like holiday camps, sporting activities. They had physical activities, character building. So they'd jump over fires and things like that. And they'd have boxing tournaments just to try and build people's character and basically get rid of all weakness. So if you cried at one of these things, oof, woe betide. So you had close combat training, fighting, boxing, wrestling. You'd learn how to use weapons, which would be quite cool, I think, wouldn't it, for a young kid of like 11 or 12 to actually play with some real guns. So this basically got people to go and join the Hitler Youth. And really, they didn't even know it, but they were being brainwashed a little bit while they were there. Okay, so that's a similarity of fun things, but actually a way of indoctrinating or brainwashing people. And similarly, again, so a lot of similarities really, as clearly as you can see, hopefully. Education was also controlled by the Nazis. So boys were educated in being ruthless, strong and proud. No weakness at all. Girls were educated in how to be a good housewife and a mother. The curriculum was rewritten, especially the history curriculum. Obviously, you'd want to try and make out that the Jews caused World War One and all these things, and the Germans were the strongest and they didn't lose, but they were screwed, or whatever you might want to think. All that kind of thing is what you'd have been taught in history lessons. Lots of sport and lots of PE, obviously to get you fit and healthy, ready for a war. Biology was changed to teach about this superior Aryan race and all about the dangers of mixing with other races and things like that. So you were basically learning not to mix or, have relationships with non-Aryans. And girls would also be taught how to be a good housewife and a good mum. Okay, so at this point we can pause this and just watch this cartoon, this Education for Death cartoon it's called. It's really good, a really, really good cartoon to give you a bit of an idea about how school was changed. It follows basically a little boy called Hans from being born right the way up to going into the war. It's a little bit upsetting in some places, but nothing too violent. But it does give you a good idea about how they used education to prepare these young people for the future. All right, so when you're ready to come back to this, we've just got a few more to do for your table and then we'll be done. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed that cartoon. It's quite good for showing us what it was like to be a child in Germany. So women were expected to be at home. That's a difference, isn't it, from Stalin? Stalin said that they should be at work. Hitler wanted women at home having children for Hitler. So that women were given medals every time they reached the milestone. So if you had 4 children, you were given a bronze medal. If you had 6 children, you were given a silver medal. And if you had 8 children, you were given a gold medal. And you'd wear these things out and you'd show how proud you were to be doing this for Hitler, and everyone would know you were a good Nazi. Kinderkirche Küche is German for basically kitchen, church and home, child. So obviously a Kinderegg is just basically German for child. So that was a woman's job, Kinderkirche Küche. So child, home and church, be a good Nazi, run the house and things like that. So it's one of the most famous posters you can see on the screen, showing a perfect Aryan German family. Just everything that Hitler wants, a traditional family with the wife at home. So that's a bit of a difference really from Russia. You might think that that's good for women to have a role, but you might also think that that's not good for women who didn't want to actually be housewives and things like that. Okay, now that we've finished this information, you can make sure your table's complete. Do the last column, doing the comparisons 1 to 10. Remember, 10 is exactly the same, 1 is the exact opposite, so you probably want to be somewhere between, 3 to 7 in most things. There's some things that are very clearly similar, and there are some things that are very different. I'd like you to then just summarise in your book or in your Google Doc, wherever it is you're writing these things. Basically, are there any common themes as to why they both rose to power? And just do a little summary paragraph or a couple of bullet points on how similar overall you think Hitler and Stalin were. Okay, so quite a content heavy session, this one. So thank you very much. Hopefully you found this useful in portraying Hitler and Stalin, and you're able to fairly confidently understand how they came to power, what they did that was similar, and how they basically kept power. Alright, as always, if there's been anything that you've not been sure about, please drop us an email and let us know, and hopefully we'll be getting close to coming back soon. But in the meantime, take care and remain safe.